Alright, so I was woken up super early this morning at like 8 o'clock by Hugh, the Pacific drummer, and he had me come get his 4L80E he's had sitting in a shed forever that he wanted me to take apart and see what's wrong with it. So I've gotten it down to the point where I got the O-ring off the front of it, I got the wiring harness out of it, filter off of it, and pretty much just take the pan off and the sensors off of it. He actually took the park neutral sensor for his other transmission. So I'm just going to pull it apart and see if I can figure out what failed in it, because he couldn't even do a burnout 10 seconds before he was about to take the transmission out. So that's kind of where we're at today with this thing, or tonight rather, because it's getting late into the night from all my projects and my long trip to Connecticut for Mr. Hugh. This right here is the oil feed to the back side of the transmission. If you don't put that in correctly, you won't feed oil to the back of the transmission and you'll burn it up. These things eat bushings like nothing. So be wary that his bushings could have all just failed, but I don't think that's actually what happened. His thought was that his cooler failed to cool the fluid in the radiator. He thought that the factory cooler, because he has a Chinese radiator in his truck, he was figuring that that's what made it fail. So hopefully, if he's right, then all this wouldn't be for nothing. Oh, I missed one. I missed just the one. There's always one. Four more. I think I got every single one of them that I needed to get. I guess those ones needed to go too. Just set the valve body aside, and there are a few check balls on this side, which I did not grab a magnet. I just need to grab a magnet. I happened to have found one yesterday in all my tools, so luckily. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I believe that is all there is. Transmission pans work for really, really, really good parts holders. And this is the reverse piston servo right here. So this piece is what everybody cries about when they lose reverse and can't figure out why their transmission won't go anywhere. This is actually the part that fails. It's not this piece itself, it's the band that this piece actuates, and they make this little nose thing that goes on it, and as you can see there's a lot of... He said that he burned this thing up good, and as you can see I'm believing it. He's making me a believer of burning this thing up. So, oops. I don't want to do that. You gotta muscle these things around sometimes, I guess. So, front pump bolts next. Oops. Grab a 13 instead of a 15 and you'll do better than I did. miscellaneous screwdriver types will pull the front pump. You can use a front pump puller if you are rich enough to have one. I am not rich enough to have one. So I use a couple of screwdrivers, or pry bars, to try and get it out. But it seems as though his front pump is in there. We were able to get it unstuck. Front pump doesn't look too bad yet. I need to try and move this transition over. I believe that's the intermediate clutches right there. These are the fourth gear clutches, and they look fairly smoked. Try to put things kind of sort of in order. These are pretty heated up, but you can actually still, I don't know if you can see that, but you can still see the writing on these, which means they're not too bad, but they did get heated up a fair amount. But I think Hugh always just kind of jumped on the highway and romped on it, which means it was probably fairly engaged when he would get on the clutches, or get on the tranny when it came to the fourth gear clutches, so I wasn't too worried about that. But for some reason, yeah, that's where remembering how to take things apart works. There's one little baby Torx in here that needs to come out. In shift kits, this is an aluminum bolt, and it's actually a feed bolt. It has a hole in the middle of it for it to feed from the valve body. But it's in the shift kits, it's always a different piece because they tend to break. I'm gonna take there's a 3/8 12 point, and you'll need to use a chrome socket because it's pretty tight. And it's right back here. And even this one doesn't want to go in. Maybe it was a 10mm chrome. Nope, it's just that it doesn't want to go in. Those love to break, so once you start going, keep going. 12 points are pretty tough, but the bolt itself, you can feel it. It's warm from coming out of there. But it's, I had to actually tap it into the case. I think that's the first time I've ever had to do that. So, next project is getting the fourth apply piston housing. So this is the fourth apply piston housing, and this thing is not fun to change the seals on, to say the least, but it can be done. But that's what, it's like the basket for applying the fourth gear clutches. This, I believe, is the forward clutch, and it doesn't seem too bad. It seems to be. Might actually be locked up. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. There's actually a tool to take this piece out because it's a pain to get out. But a 90-degree angle pick works just as good as the GM tool, in my opinion. And this is the direct clutch, and it's got a one-way sprag on the back side of it. So if you pull this out and it's going the wrong way, it's possible somebody put it in incorrectly. But these like to burn up a lot too. People like to, I believe they call dual feeding these. I think it's either that or they do it to that one. I can't remember which. Maybe I'll do an update video on all this stuff. This piece right here, these bushings. See, these bushings are, these are supposed to have bronze in them, like that. See how those are bronze? And that bushing right there is just completely wiped out. So I believe that bushing. Oh yeah, and watch out for your all your bearings. You don't want to lose your orientation of bearings. It's fairly simple to figure out, but this piece right here though, this piece feeds, there's holes in it that feed, that line up with stuff in there, and if you don't get it all lined up correctly, stuff don't work right, or it don't last long. This band right here only applies, put that down anywhere. This band right here only applies in, if you put the transmission down into second, this band will apply. Otherwise, it hardly ever applies. It looks like Hugh must have dragged it down into second a few times because it's got some burning on it, but not too much. Now, next order of business is the snap ring down here. You guys won't be able to really see this, but trust me when I say there's a snap ring down here. Sometimes I can't even see things. Let me get a light. Cool. I gotta stick my head in the way, but it is what it is. That snap ring, there we go. If you look, that snap ring is actually out of place. See how that snap ring is? And this model has two cooler lines that are right next to each other, and that snap ring is out of place right there. And on the other model that have the cooler lines further apart, the case is built a little bit different, and I believe this has more space. But I have a different case actually over there that I could check it on. But at any rate, that snap ring is quite beat up. These clutches definitely got hot a few times. Now he had slipping codes in this transmission and it didn't really want to go anywhere. And you see this half moon right here, that goes in that section right there. And yep, so moving on. Grab the last. That one has little feet, this one always goes last in this clutch. And it looks as though it has another snap ring down here. Bing. This is a beveled snap ring, and the bevel goes up. If you look at that little bevel to it, and it fucked me the whole way. I hear noises. That is the bushing in the back of the transmission. This bushing is quite worn out. These are not supposed to be this worn. and that'll give you a lot of play on the drivetrain too. But these are bushing eaters, that's what they like to call them. And the see if I can get the lower reverse band out of it, or the reverse band itself out, just to show you how they work, because everybody has questions about them. Thin snap ring that holds in between them. Doo-doo-doo. These can be a little bit of a bear to get out. These right here, 2 lugs hold against the case right here, and then this right here will actually apply this reverse band. So the first time I ever took one of these transmissions apart was in high school, and the guys plowing snow at the school actually broke. This piece was broken, so it would slip in reverse. And let me tell you, to do this much work to just get down and change this one part is not fun. So, another story for another time, I guess. So let me get this case out of the way, and we will begin to disassemble some of the parts to it. As you can see, this fluid is nice and clean, Hugh. It smells like an electrical fire in my garage. I'm sure the neighbors will love it. But yeah, we'll get this thing all cleaned up a little bit and take these clutches out. See what we can find went wrong, because I haven't found anything too bad yet. Oh, one check ball. I missed one. Unless it was coming out of something that shouldn't have been in. But nothing that I haven't seen before. These transmissions, like I said, love to eat bushings. Every one I've ever done gets a bushing kit most of the time. I've never done one that hasn't gotten a bushing kit, because they just about all need them. So, I'll be right back at you. So there's usually nothing that goes wrong with this except for this bushing is fairly worn out. And I'm just trying to keep this together in case Hugh changes his mind and wants me to build him a transmission, but I kind of doubt that's going to happen. All this whole sprag seems fine. And the planetaries in this seem alright. Let's see about this clutch drum. It'll be really funny if most of his transmission was okay and he just needed a valve body repair. Smaller screwdriver, it's a bigger screwdriver, that's on easier. Come out wherever you are. No real carnage yet. Lots of whoop, whoop, whoop. I think we found the carnage. Yes, we did. We found the carnage. That's a friction. That's a steel. And that is a friction with no material on it whatsoever left. Unbelievable how things like that can happen. Yep, so he definitely It's funny too, because this clutch, he must have fixed this pretty quickly. Wow. This thing is burned up pretty good. Even the molded piston in this thing is pretty well shot as well. Do I have another clutch drum over there? No, that one's put together. This molded piston that's in here is it's been beat up by the I'm not sure about these models, but this thing, I'm not positive whether that's, I think that's the direct clutch drum, but that's the one that burned up in my transmission. In the dually, when I purchased the truck, it was burned up, and the kid did not want to fix it, so he gave me a good price on the truck. Maybe that's the way these clutches, these pistons are. I've never done a 96. I've done all the later model ones. These clutches are just about just as burnt up. So that's a friction, and it's completely burned. That's a steel. That's a friction. That's steel that's pretty well burned. That's friction. Steel that's pretty well burned. Friction that's pretty well burned. All the material is missing off the back side of all these. These aren't one-sided frictions. These are frictions that have no material on one side of them. So his forward and direct clutch drums completely burned up. No wonder why he couldn't go anywhere. Wowzers, Hugh. The Pacific Drummer killed it. So we know that that's what his issue was. I have to do a little setup stuff here. I got to get a couple of tools, and we're going to pull these two clutch drums apart. We're going to pull them out and see if the seals failed or if it was just his transmission. This transmission case design has always had a really poor. They always chew up bushings because of the way that the fluid is put into the transmission to cool it, because these two cooler lines right here, usually they're down here on the older cases, which I have an older or later model cases, which I have a later model one over there, and I think that's part of his issue. But he also, like I said, had that the cooler failure, failure to really force fluid anywhere. So let me just get a few tools so I can take these clutch drums apart and see what happens. Okay, so I got my little tool on here, taking the snap ring off, which it's not easier. It's easier said than done. And then release my tool. I already did the other clutch drum in the intermission brake. So this is a spring cage. So this is what pushes the piston and all the hydraulic pressure back down when it releases. This is what actually gets the clutch pack to release. And if you, it seems like it's working, but I see that the seal on this clutch drum is completely torn, and that's why this failed. It actually is quite junk. These are molded. Usually these are molded pistons on the later model transmissions. These actually have a seal on the inside, and they also have a seal that's, this one's part of it. This one's just right there. That seal right there. You can change that one out too. But because that seal failed, this just stick this one back in here so it doesn't get lost for if it ever gets rebuilt, when it gets rebuilt, because this will get rebuilt, right? He will need another transmission before the Duramax swap. I can feel it. But this one over here is actually in decent shape, so I'm not really, I mean, these are super, like, the reason why this one is so torn up more than that one is because this seal actually completely failed. And on this clutch drum, it was still fairly decent, but this one's soft, but these side ones, these lip seals are all like plastic almost. They're so hard. You have to take my word for it. I know you can't see it. So I just can't remember which one's the forward and which one's the direct. I know what they are. But so case in point, this is why maintenance is always the best, because maintenance would have helped this, but obviously he didn't know his cooler was clogged, so that's the here nor there of it. There's one more part out of all of these pieces that has clutches in it. I believe is this piece right here. These are, I think they're I want to say they're the overrun clutches or direct clutches. I can't remember. But there's a little snap ring right here. Once you pull that little snap ring off, and you get your shaft off, and these have Teflon sealing rings on them, which these Teflon sealing rings are actually in decent shape, and the shaft itself, a bushing rides on here, and that's actually in decent shape. Don't try this at home, folks, you'll get hurt. Safety glasses, that's where it's all at. Wear your safety glasses, kids. This sprag right here, always replace this sprag. It's plastic, it gets hot, and it fails very frequently. This is all that holds your transmission in third gear unless you dual feed it with a Sonax kit. So if you don't replace this, chances are you'll be back into it. I do that on most rebuilds. And these clutches are like brand new. You can actually see the writing on them. Believe it or not. So this piece on a GM rebuild would not even get touched after this. Unfortunately. And they wouldn't replace that sprag either, because it's GM. Who needs to replace the sprag when you're GM? So, fourth gear clutches are alright. Directed forward clutches are completely smoked. And the let's see, what else was there? I think the lower reverse clutches I think were a little bit dirty, but not too bad. They're a little bit burnt, but not so bad. It was the forward and direct, which is always a common failure, and if you were going to do this, I would do a full rebuild, bushings throughout it, Teflon sealing rings throughout it. He actually has blue Teflon sealing rings on the pump, which leads me to believe this thing has either never been apart or saw a rebuild early in its life when people used to use one-piece sealing rings on those, because no one ever uses one-piece sealing rings on those anymore. But in most of these components, even the bushings that have bronze on them are still pretty worn. I think I got a bushing over here that's brand new that I can show you what it should look like new. As always, I have a spare part. That's what they should look like new. They should not have any silver showing through them and no lines in them. That's a tail shaft bushing out of a transmission that was 4-wheel drive. So don't worry, I didn't leave it on anyone's rebuild. So like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, and let Hugh know on his channel that his transmission is junk. He already knew that because he already swapped another one into it. And that one's starting to go bad. So if he doesn't do the Duramax project soon, we're going to be putting a transmission together for him, I think, on the cheap. I think that anybody can do this if they put their mind to it. There's a lot of good videos out there on how to actually rebuild the full transmission and not just tear it down and know what failed. But obviously knowing that seals should not be hanging loose inside of a clutch drum off of a piston, then you know what to look for, because that's what failed on this. Was, I believe, his pistons failed, and definitely his bushings feeding the line pressure failed, and heat also was a factor. So if you can't tell by the completely burnt fluid throughout this disassembly. So anyways, guys, I'm going to link the video of him having issues with his transmission. He replaced these two shift solenoids on the valve body. They're brand new. He tried those to try to get it to shift better, and I think it worked a little bit for a little while, but then just completely failed. But when you got bushing tear up that's this bad in a transmission, that's gonna lose pressure. And what happens is the whole drivetrain, when in the transmission, when the bushings lose their, all their tolerance, the drivetrain kind of hangs. And when it hangs, that's when you start to get your slipping shifts and all that kind of stuff. And you could replace all these clutches and all these molded pistons and all that stuff, but if you don't put bushings in it and you don't feed it with the proper amount of pressure, it's just going to fail again. So remember that for the next rebuild. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I'm sure Hugh will. So see you later on the next one.